Oh, now, not a single Republican supported it. Here's what their leaders said. Their leaders said our plan would increase the deficit, kill jobs, and give us a one-way ticket to a recession. Time has not been kind to their predictions. You remember, our Republican friends said then they would absolutely not be held responsible for our economic policies. I hope the American people take them at their word. Today, after 7.5 years of hard effort, we're in the midst of the longest economic expansion in history. More than 22 million new jobs, the lowest unemployment in 30 years, the lowest female unemployment in 40 years, the lowest Hispanic and African American unemployment rate ever recorded, and the highest home ownership in history. Along the way, in 1995, we turned back the largest cuts in history in Medicare, Medicaid, education, and the environment. And just 2 years later, we proved that we could find a way to balance the budget and protect our values. Today, we have gone from the largest deficits in history to the largest surpluses in history. And if, but only if, we stay on course, we can make America debt-free for the first time since Andy Jackson was president in 1835. Now, for the first time in decades, wages are rising at all income levels. We have the lowest child poverty in 20 years. The lowest poverty rate for single mothers ever recorded. The average family's income has gone up more than $5,000, and for African American families, even more. The number of families who own stock in our country has grown by 40%. You know, Harry Truman's old saying has never been more true. If you want to live like a Republican, you better vote for the Democrats. But our progress is about far more than economics. America is also more hopeful, more secure, and more free. We're more hopeful because we're turning our schools around with higher standards, more accountability, more investment. We have doubled funding for Head Start and provided after-school and mentoring to more than 1 million more young people. We're putting 100,000 well-trained teachers in the early grades to lower class size. 95% of our schools are already connected to the internet. Reading, math, and SAT scores are up, and more students than ever are going on to college, thanks to the biggest expansion of college aid since the GI Bill 50 years ago. Now, don't let anybody tell you that all children can't learn or that our public schools can't make the grade. Yes, they can. Yes, they can. Now, we're also more hopeful because we ended welfare as we knew it. Now those who can work must work. On that, we and the Republicans agreed. But we Democrats also insisted on support for good parenting, so that poor children don't go hungry or lose their health care, unmarried teens stay in school, and people get the job training, child care, and transportation they need. It has worked. Today, there are more than 7.5 million people who've moved from welfare to work, and the welfare rolls in our administration have been cut in half. Now, we're more hopeful because of the way we cut taxes to help Americans meet the challenges of work and child rearing. This year alone, our Hope Scholarship and Lifelong Learning tax credits will help 10 million families pay for college. Our Earned Income Tax Credit will help 15 million families work their way into the middle class. 25 million families will get a $500 child tax credit. Our Empowerment Zone tax credits are bringing new businesses and new jobs to our hardest pressed communities, from the inner cities to Appalachia to the Mississippi Delta to our Native American reservations. And the typical American family today is paying a lower share of its income in federal income taxes than at any time during the past 35 years. We are more hopeful because of the Family and Medical Leave Act, a bill that the previous administration vetoed. They said it would cost jobs. It's the first bill I signed. And we now have a test. 22 million new jobs later, over 20 million Americans have been able to take a little time off to care for a newborn child or a sick relative. That's what it means. That's what it really means to be pro-family. We are a more secure country because we cut crime with tougher enforcement, more than 100,000 new community police officers, a ban on assault weapons, and the Brady Law, which has kept guns out of the hands of 500,000 felons, fugitives, and stalkers. Today, crime in America is at a 25-year low. And we're more secure because of advances in health care. We've extended the life of the Medicare Trust Fund by 26 years, added coverage for cancer screening and cutting-edge clinical trials. We're coming closer to cures for dreaded diseases. We made sure that people with disabilities could go to work without losing their health care, and that people could switch jobs without losing their coverage. We dramatically improved diabetes care. We provided health coverage under the Children's Health Insurance Program to 2 million previously uninsured children. And for the first time in our history, more than 90% of our kids have been immunized against serious childhood diseases. You can be proud of that Democratic record. We're more secure because our environment is cleaner. We've set aside more land in the lower 48 states than any administration since Teddy Roosevelt. Saving national treasures like Yellowstone, the great California redwoods, the Florida Everglades. Moreover, our air is cleaner, our water is cleaner, our food is safer, and our economy is stronger. You can grow the economy and protect the environment at the same time. We're more free because we are closer today to the one America of our dreams, celebrating our diversity, affirming our common humanity, opposing all forms of bigotry, from church burnings to racial profiling to murderous hate crimes. We're fighting for the employment non-discrimination legislation and for equal pay for women. We found ways to mend, not end affirmative action. We've given America the most diverse administration in history. It really looks like America. You know, if I could just get my administration up here, it would be just as good a picture as anything you saw a couple of weeks ago in Philadelphia. The real people running it. And we created AmeriCorps, which already has given more than 150,000 of our young people a chance to earn some money for college by serving in our communities. We are more secure and we're more free because of our leadership in the world for peace, freedom, and prosperity, helping to end a generation of conflict in Northern Ireland, stopping the brutal ethnic cleansing in Bosnia and Kosovo, and bringing the Middle East closer than ever to a comprehensive peace. We built stronger ties to Africa, Asia, and our Latin American and Caribbean neighbors. We brought Poland, Hungary, and the Czech Republic into NATO. We're working with Russia to destroy nuclear weapons and materials. We're fighting head-on the new threats and injustices of the global age: terrorism, narco-trafficking, biological and chemical warfare, the trafficking in women and young girls, and the deadly spread of AIDS. And in the great tradition of President Jimmy Carter, who's here tonight, we are still the world's leading force for human rights around the world. Thank you, President Carter. The American military is the best trained, best equipped, most effective fighting force in the world. Our men and women have shown that time and again in Bosnia and Kosovo and Haiti and Iraq. I can tell you that their strength, their spirit, their courage, and their commitment to freedom have never been greater. Any adversary who believes those who say otherwise is making a grave mistake. Now, my fellow Americans, that's the record. Or, as that very famous Los Angeles detective, Sergeant Joe Friday, used to say, just the facts, ma'am. Let's remember the standard our Republican friends used to have for whether a party should continue in office. My fellow Americans, are we better off today than we were 8 years ago? we are. Now, yes, we are. But, yes, we are. But, we're not just better off, we're also a better country. We are today more tolerant, more decent, more humane, and more united. Now that's the purpose of prosperity. Since 1992, America has grown not just economically, but as a community. Yes, jobs are up, but so are adoptions. Yes, the debt is down, but so is teen pregnancy. We are becoming both more diverse and more united. My fellow Americans, tonight we can say with gratitude and humility, we built our bridge to the 21st century. We crossed that bridge together, and we're not going back. Now, to those who say, thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. We're not going back. Thank you. Wait. Thank you. To those who say, and I'm sure you heard this somewhere in the last few days, to those who say the progress of these last 8 years was just some sort of accident, that we just kind of coasted along, let me be clear. America's success was not a matter of chance, it was a matter of choice. And today America faces another choice. It's every bit as momentous as the one we faced 8 years ago. For what a nation does with its good fortune is just as stern a test of its character, values, and judgment as how it deals with adversity. My fellow Americans, this is a big election with great consequences for every American, because the differences, the honest differences between our candidates and their visions are so profound. We can have a good old-fashioned election here. We should posit that our opponents are good, honorable, patriotic people, and that we have honest differences. But the differences are there. Consider this, just this. We in America would already have this year a real Patients' Bill of Rights, a minimum wage increase, stronger equal pay laws for women, and middle-class tax cuts for college tuition and long-term care if the Democratic Party were in the majority in Congress, with Dick Gephardt as Speaker and Tom Daschle as Majority Leader. And come November, they will be. Thank you. Now, that has to be clear to people. And that's why every House and every Senate seat is important. But if you'll give me one moment of personal privilege, I'd like to say a word about Hillary. When I first met her 30 years ago, She already had an abiding passion to help children, and she's pursued it ever since. Her very first job out of law school was with the Children's Defense Fund. Every year I was governor, she took lots of time away from her law practice to work for better schools or better children's health or jobs for parents who lived in poor areas. Then when I became president, she became a full-time advocate for her lifetime cause. And what a job she has done. She championed the family leave law, children's health insurance, increased support for foster children and adoptions. She wrote a best-selling book about caring for our children, and then she took care of them by giving all the profits to children's charities. For 30 years from the first day I met her, she has always been there for all our kids. She's been a great First Lady. She's always been there for our family, and she'll always be there for the families of New York and America. Now, of course, we all know that the biggest choice that the American people have to make this year is in the presidential race. Now, you all know how I feel. But it's not my decision to make. That belongs to the American people. I just want to tell all of you here in this great arena and all the folks watching and listening at home a few things that I know about Al Gore. We've worked closely together for 8 years now. In the most challenging moments, when we face the most difficult issues of war and peace, of whether to take on some powerful interest, he was always there. And he always told me exactly what he thought was right. Everybody knows he is thoughtful and hardworking, but I can tell you personally, he is one strong leader. In 1993, there was nobody around the table more willing to make the tough choices, to balance the budget the right way, and take this tough stance against balancing the budget on the backs of the poor and working people of America. I have seen this kind of positioning and this kind of strength time and time again, whether it was in how we reform welfare, or in protecting the environment, or in closing the digital divide, or bringing jobs to rural and urban America through the Empowerment Zone program. The greatest champion of ordinary Americans has always been Al Gore. I'll tell you something else about him. More than anybody else I've known in public life, Al Gore understands the future and how sweeping changes and scientific breakthroughs will affect ordinary Americans' lives. And I think we need somebody in the White House at the dawn of the 21st century who really understands the future. Finally, I want to say something more personal. Virtually every week for the last 7.5 years, until he became occupied with more important matters, Al Gore and I had lunch. And we talked about the business between us and the business of America. But we'd also often talk about our families, what our kids were doing, how school was going, what was going on in their lives. I know him. He is a profoundly good man. He loves his children more than life. And he has a perfectly wonderful wife who has fought against homelessness and who has done something for me and all Americans in bringing the cause of mental health into the broad sunlight of our national public life. We owe Tipper Gore our thanks. Al has picked a great partner in Joe Lieberman. There's the Connecticut crowd. Hillary and I have known Joe for 30 years, since we were in Connecticut in law school. I supported him in his first race for public office in 1970 when I learned he had been a freedom rider, going into danger to register black voters in the then segregated South. It should not be a surprise to anyone that Al Gore picked the leader of the New Democrats to be his vice president, because Joe Lieberman has supported all our efforts to reform welfare, reduce crime, protect the environment, protect civil rights and a woman's right to choose, and to keep this economy going. All of them. And he has shown time and time again that he will work with President Gore to keep putting people and progress over partisanship. Now it's up, frankly, to the presidential nominee and the vice presidential nominee to engage in this debate and to point out the differences. But there are two issues I care a lot about, and I want to make brief comments on them, and I hope I've earned the right to make comments on them. One is the economy. I know a little something about that. And the other is our efforts to build one America. First, on the economy, Al Gore and Joe Lieberman will keep our prosperity going by paying down the debt, investing in education and health care, moving more people from welfare to work, and providing family tax cuts we can afford. Now, that stands in stark contrast to the position of our Republican friends. Here is their position. They say we have a big projected 10-year surplus, and they want to spend every dime of it and then some on tax cuts right now. That would leave nothing for education or Medicare, prescription drugs, nothing to extend the life of Medicare and Social Security for the baby boomers, nothing in case the projected surpluses don't come in. Now think about your own family's budget for a minute, or your own business budget. Would you sign a binding contract today to spend all your projected income for a decade, leaving nothing for your family's basic needs, nothing for emergencies, nothing for a cushion in case you didn't get the raise you thought you were going to get? Of course you wouldn't do that, and America shouldn't do it either. We should stick with what works. Now, let me say something to you that's even more important than the economy to me. When Al Gore picked Joe Lieberman, the first Jewish American to join a national ticket, to be his partner, and he joined with our presidential nominee, who has, along with his great mother and late father, a lifetime commitment to civil rights and equal opportunity for all, even when it was not popular down home in the South. When they did that, we had a ticket that embodies the Democratic commitment to one America. They believe in civil rights and equal opportunity for everybody. They believe in a woman's right to choose. And this may be the most important of all, they believe the folks that you're buying your soft drinks and popcorn from here at the Staples Center should have the exact same chance that they do to send their kids to college and give them a good life and a good future. My fellow Americans, I am very proud of our leaders. And I want you to know that the opportunity I have had to serve as president at the dawn of a new era in human history has been an honor, a privilege, and a joy. I have done everything I knew how to do to empower the American people, to unleash their amazing optimism and imagination and hard work, to turn our country around from where it was in 1992 and to get us moving forward together. Now, what I want you to understand tonight is that the best is still out there. The best is yet to come if we make the right choices in this election year. But the choices will make all the difference. In February, the American people achieved the longest economic expansion in our history. When that happened, I asked our folks at the White House when the previous longest economic expansion was. You know when it was? It was from 1961 through 1969. Now, I want the young people especially to listen to this. I remember this well. I graduated from high school in 1964. Our country was still very sad because of President Kennedy's death, but full of hope under the leadership of President Johnson. And I assumed then, like most Americans, that our economy was absolutely on automatic, that nothing could derail it. I also believed then that our civil rights problems would all be solved in Congress and the courts. And in 1964, when we were enjoying the longest economic expansion in history, we never dreamed that Vietnam would so divide and wound America. So we took it for granted. And then, before we knew it, there were riots in the streets, even here. The leaders that I adored as a young man, Martin Luther King and Robert Kennedy, were killed. Lyndon Johnson, a president from my part of the country I admired so much for all he did for civil rights, for the elderly and the poor, said he would not run again because our nation was so divided. And then we had an election in 1968 that took America on a far different and more divisive course. And you know, within months after that election, the longest economic expansion in history was itself history. Why am I telling you this tonight? Not to take you down, but to keep you looking up. I have waited, not as president, but as your fellow citizen, for over 30 years to see my country once again in the position to build the future of our dreams for our children. We are a great and good people. And we have an even better chance this time than we did then, with no great internal crisis and no great external threat. Still, I have lived long enough to know that opportunities must be seized or they will be lost. My friends, 54 years ago this week, I was born in a summer storm to a young widow in a small southern town. America gave me the chance to live my dreams. And I have tried as hard as I knew how to give you a better chance to live yours. Now, my hair is a little grayer, my wrinkles are a little deeper, but with the same optimism and hope I brought to the work I loved so 8 years ago, I want you to know my heart is filled with gratitude. My fellow Americans, the future of our country is now in your hands. You must think hard, feel deeply, and choose wisely. And remember, whenever you think about me, keep putting people first. Keep building those bridges. And don't stop thinking about tomorrow. I love you and good night.
It was only in a reference there at the very end, a very oblique reference, that the president referred to the personal mistakes of his administration, of his life over the last 7.5 years in the White House. Other than that, this was a speech focused on touting what his administration has accomplished and on saying we've got to keep going in this direction.
This was a speech of just about 40 minutes, longer than Eisenhower's in 1960, shorter than Reagan's in 1988. He borrowed from a few Republicans. Are you better off than you were 8 years ago? Is a line made famous by Reagan in 1980. His reference to Sergeant Joe Friday, just a facts man, was a little lift from George Bush's 1988 acceptance speech. And more important in the tone, he kind of did what Ronald Reagan did in 1988. Gently mocked the opposition, referred to the Republican opposition to his program and said time has not been kind to their predictions, touted his own administration's achievement and said the way to keep it going is with Al Gore and Joe Lieberman. A kind of classic passing of the torch speech, I thought, by someone who clearly loves the idea of connecting with people and his supporters. He was enjoying every minute of this, I thought, Bernie.
Indeed. He mentioned the word Republican 6 times in this speech tonight, only 6 times, of course, never naming names. And did you notice his voice started trembling at the end when he spoke of having waited 30 years to see his country once again in a strong economic position to help the future of the American children? And in defending his administration and underscoring its successes, he urged the election of Al Gore and Joe Lieberman using these words, especially when he referred to the economy: we should stick with what works.
The message was also clear. We built our bridge to the 21st century. We crossed it together, and we're not going back. A clear reference to this election. Joining us here in our skybox overlooking this convention, Mike McCurry, former press secretary to President Clinton. Leon Panetta, former White House chief of staff under President Clinton. Leon Panetta, what are you thinking?
Well, I'm thinking that you've just listened to a master of the political speech. This is a president who really loves to give a political speech, particularly to a very receptive audience, which was the case here, certainly at the convention. But he's somebody who touched all the bases. He talked about his record. He talked about the issues, and that's where obviously the Gore campaign has to define itself for this coming race. He talked about Hillary. He talked about Al Gore, Joe Lieberman, and then he ended obviously with an indication of his thankfulness for the opportunity to serve the nation. I think he touched all of the buttons. I think the crowd is reacting, and I think he did a good job doing what he had to do tonight.
Michael McCurry, beyond the hall, because delegates would love a speech like this, I think, of any party if a president read the phone book to him. Beyond the hall, what's the message to the country that may be looking at Al Gore and not quite sure that he's the right fellow to take them down the road? What's he trying to tell us?
Well, there's not much that President Clinton can do on that score, but he did do something that I thought was important. He laid out the economic case for the Democratic economic plan, tax cuts, surpluses, Social Security, and he made it so simple and so clear, the choice between what Al Gore would present versus what we heard from the Republicans in Philadelphia. That sets a beautiful foundation for Al Gore now to come in and describe what the future is about. You know, Bill Clinton, it's almost corny. Don't stop thinking about tomorrow. But in a way, his success and his brilliance as a politician was he always did point us forward. He never rested on the record or rested on his laurels considerable. He always pointed the country ahead to the future and did build that bridge. I think that's a critical part of what we saw tonight in this speech.
And this picture that he painted was a picture of a very different America than the picture we heard 2 Thursdays ago when George W. Bush stood before the Republican convention and talked about this administration having squandered prosperity.
For my money, as a retired speechwriter and retired for good reasons, one of the most effective lines in this was when he said of the Republicans, back in '93, they said they would not be held responsible for the results of our economic policies. I hope the American people will take them at their word, clearly meaning the economic circumstances are the best. We are going down to the floor now to Jean Mazur. Jean.
Right down to here, Jeff. We're starting a number from the Music Man. We got Trouble right here in River City. Not certain exactly what the context is, but the audience loves it, as they loved that speech. You don't have to ask them. They showed you. They were stomping. They were screaming. They were waving their signs. And some of them, a lot of them actually, were crying down here. As controversial as Bill Clinton may be, this is a crowd that absolutely loves him. They like this speech, particularly the humor in it when he referred to Joe Friday and just the facts, man. They went wild where I was sitting. They were having a lot of fun with this speech, and they loved turning the tables on the Republicans. Now to my colleague Frank Sesno.
Gene, thanks. Just in case folks know, and if you made reference, my apologies because I could barely hear anything, but we have a rendition of the Music Man behind us. We also have a rendition of Senator Joe Biden right here. You spoke, not like this up front, but you spoke to the Iowa delegation today, and not to be a skunk at the garden party, but you said this party has been cowed in the past by certain things, including Bill Clinton's indiscretions, and the party should not back away in any form.
I don't think we should back away at all. Look, Bill Clinton made serious mistakes in his personal life. He did a hell of a job leading this country. What I was saying to the Iowa delegation today, this election should be about integrity, not just about the personal integrity of the candidates, but their intellectual integrity. Does anybody believe that George W. Bush really wants a patient's Bill of Rights where my mother doesn't have to pay anything for prescriptions after a couple $1,000 bucks? Does anybody believe, does it require decency to lead people on to think they're going to be able to have their prescription drugs paid when they know damn well they have no intention of doing it? I think we should say, let's make this about integrity. I'm all for that.
The voters will obviously be balancing that, and they'll be balancing those indiscretions you talked about.
Well, I think the voters are pretty smart. They know Al Gore didn't have a darn thing to do with Clinton's indiscretions. Clinton was Clinton. His fault. He was wrong. As Joe Lieberman said, it was immoral and wrong, and he's been punished in history the rest of as long as he's written about. But that has nothing to do with Joe Lieberman. That has nothing to do with Al Gore.
Joe Biden, thanks very much. Appreciate it. Over to my colleague, Candy Crowley.
Thanks, Frank. I'm having the same hearing problem you have between the exiting of this crowd, which is eager to get out of here, and the Music Man. I spent most of my time during both Bill and Hillary's speeches in the New York delegation. It was sort of a twofer for them. They got to hear the woman that they hope will be the next senator of New York, and then they got to hear the president. This was a hometown crowd, absolutely no doubt about it. They loved it. No tears here, but rapt attention even when he was in the rather calm parts of his speeches, lots of humor. This is a man they're going to miss. He, after all, did bring them out of the wilderness to 12 years of Republican rule and gave them 8 years of a Democrat in the White House. Now to my colleague, John King.
Thank you, Candy. Bill Clinton, obviously a polarizing figure in the country. In the hall tonight, though, a very beloved figure, and a man who has run a lot of campaigns, not only his own, and he knows when you give a big political speech, you try to address your weaknesses. Look at what he said in that speech. Prosperity has a purpose, a direct rebuttal to Governor Bush there. Also said that Al Gore was a strong leader. Look at our polling. One of the vice president's problems right now, he is not viewed as a strong leader by many in the country. Also, he said there was never more of a champion for ordinary Americans than Vice President Al Gore. Again, if you look at the polling in this race, ordinary Americans have questions about whether the vice president shares their values. So as the president gave his farewell address here to the Democratic convention tonight, trying very much to help out his vice president, the question now, what will his role be from here on forward? Many state chairmen in states where the vice president is losing saying they would like to see a much more active role for Bill Clinton in the fall campaign. That, of course, still remains to be seen. And for more now, up to the podium, and Wolf Blitzer.
Vintage Bill Clinton's speech, there's no doubt that he was at his best tonight, the President of the United States, using all of that experience that got him to where he is today. He sort of made sure that he was going to make this valedictory remarks to these Democrats here at this convention. Of course, seen on television around the world, he was going to do the best he possibly could. And most of those who were up here do not doubt at all this was one of the best speeches the president ever delivered. If his intention was to leave on a mark, on a high note, he certainly did. It's going to be very tough for Al Gore Thursday night to follow this president's lead. Now back up to the booth for more.
Thank you, Wolf. And while delegates here in this hall celebrated happily, outside the hall, something else has been going on. Let's check in with Martin Savage.
Well, Bernie, while the president was speaking inside of the convention center, there has been a serious turn of events on the outside here regarding the protests. The protests had been, for the most part, peaceful. And then about an hour and a half ago, things started to change. There was a very large crowd that had gathered for a concert performance. A small portion, a significantly small portion, about 100 to 200 people, had begun challenging the fences and the police there. That continued for some time. There were even small fires set, and the police began using pepper spray. And then the police turned the electricity off to the concert stage. They then announced to those that were gathered that the concert was over and everyone was ordered to disperse, otherwise they could face being arrested. At that point, many of the people did begin to leave. They started heading for the exits. But there were still several hundred that remained behind, and then a heavy contingent of Los Angeles police dressed in riot gear began to move in on them. There was also a large group of Los Angeles police on mounted horse units moving in on the crowd. Since that time, the crowd has dispersed. They've left the demonstration area, but there has been a running confrontation that has been taking place in the nearby streets around Staples Center. Occasionally you could hear barrages of what sounded like tear gas or pepper balls being fired into the crowd. We could see a number of arrests that were being made. It is quiet here now. However, it is not clear exactly what is happening on the streets immediately away from this vicinity. You're looking at the live scene now out on Olympic Street. The police have been moving people away, the crowd from Staples Center, obviously, so they would not interfere with the delegates as they prepare to leave. And again, they've been trying to move the crowd away, but they still have been making arrests. It's just hard to tell you exactly how many at this point. Bernie?
Martin Savage with the latest outside, and our live coverage from the Democratic Convention will continue in just a moment.
Coverage of Election 2000 is brought to you by Dodge and Payne Weber. For expanded coverage, log on to CNN.com. Dodge. In a perfect world, everything would be different. Payne Weber. Thank you, Payne Weber.
Time flies at Dodge, where right now you can save big on almost everything. Get the best, far and away the best cash allowance on Dodge Caravan. We're talking big, bigger than big, or get even more. Low APR plus cash allowance that could save you over $4,000. Most generous savings on Dodge Caravan. Big savings, limited time, almost everything. At Dodge, different. But hurry, while time is still on your side.
What's my investment strategy? How about buy things before they go up?
For a personal financial plan, please press 5.
I'm going to pay for this. What was I?
This market's still got a lot of upside.
This market's going south.
Why didn't they write this last month?
Can't believe Dad thought he could check stock prices on this thing.
Okay, 2 of your stocks are up. What about the other 15?
Thank you, Payne Weber.
Which would you rather do? Make minimum monthly payments on your credit cards for the rest of your life? Or pay them off right now with a second mortgage with no closing costs from Ditech.com. Whether you have equity or no equity, good credit or not so good credit, Ditech Second Mortgage with absolutely no closing costs can help you to consolidate your high-interest debts into one lower monthly payment. Get fast online approval or call us right now at 1-800-71-FIX.
Does everybody know what this is? A heart. 50 million Americans suffer from high blood pressure. There are no symptoms, yet high blood pressure is the primary cause of heart disease. There are still millions who are unable to lower their blood pressure with medication. That's why we're developing this new medicine, and it has excellent effectiveness in treating blood pressure. Maybe by the time these kids are my age, we'll have found a way to prevent high blood pressure in everyone.
Folks, back in the 1960s, the Congress once tried to define a riot as involving 3 or more persons. By that definition, this version of the Capitol Gang will not be a riot because, thanks to security, only 2/5 of the Capitol Gang has made it. So, Hunt, Novak, welcome to the Capitol Gang. All yours.
Thank you, Jeff. We'll try to make up what we lack in quantity and quality, right, Robert? Let me tell you something. Bill Clinton started too late. He went too long. But whether you agree or disagree with him, it was a political tour de force.
Well, he is a great political speaker. Now, the question is it too late to repeal the amendment of the Constitution forbidding a third term? Is it too late to unnominate Al Gore? Because what Clinton can do is he can take the dull task of saying, boy, you never had it so good, and make it sound exciting. Because, Al, I listened to much of the evening, and it was mind-numbingly boring right up until President Clinton, including the speech by his wife.
No, I agree. The speech by his wife was quite ordinary, and he started off slow, but boy, what if I was standing next to Bob Hertzberg, the Speaker of the California Assembly, and halfway through he tapped me and he said, we'll never see his like again. I mean, that's true.
But that just shows the problem, I think, facing Al Gore. Can he do this? And this is a terrible standard to put Gore up against. I would have hoped, from Gore's standpoint, that the president was not quite so incendiary, not quite so charismatic, because he loved it too out there. He just loved every line. What he hated about this was leaving.
Bob, I'm stunned he left. I thought we'd be here tomorrow morning. I really was stunned. But I'll tell you, I think he set the predicate for Al Gore. He framed the debate very, very well. If they're still talking about Bill Clinton on Thursday, that's obviously bad news for Al Gore. But I think there is an analogy to the speech that Ronald Reagan gave 12 years ago on the first night of that New Orleans convention, and then left the next day. And I think he set the predicate for George Bush. And I think that Clinton did that tonight.
Now, if I can intrude with a little fact,
yes, sir.
I hope you don't mind. The 1961 to 69 was not the second longest recovery. The second longest recovery was in the Reagan administration. But I tell you, the President Clinton has never bothered playing loose with the facts. That's his trademark. And certainly this audience wasn't going to call him on it. I hope you will call him on it.
Well, Bob, of course, he did say, though, he talked about the predictions those Republicans made when the 1993 budget act was passed. And, of course, he said that time has not been kind to those predictions. Some pundits made some of those same predictions, and Bill Clinton's right. Time has not been kind to those naysayers back then, don't you think?
And, of course, the speech didn't mention Social Security in any degree. It didn't talk about international trade, didn't talk about the great split in the Democratic Party. He did not issue a call to greatness. He did not issue John F. Kennedy type call made 40 years ago to go forward. But it was a great political speech.
It was a great performance, and I noticed in the introduction they had Nelson Mandela and they had the Prime Minister of Israel. I was looking for the Prime Minister of Italy and Ireland. I think they'll get that next time.
No, they didn't quite make it. But I really do believe it was a political speech. It was not a great statesman speech. I think you'll agree with me on that.
Bob, how many statesman speeches have you heard at political conventions? This is your 22nd.
Well, this is my 22nd. My first was John F. Kennedy in the Coliseum, the other side of town, and he made a statesman speech for the New Frontier. Let's make that the standard for Al Gore, not the Clinton political speech.
Well, I think it was a terrific speech for Bill Clinton. I think it started the week in great shape for a very exuberant Democratic Party, and this is a mini version of the Capitol Gang saying we'll be back tomorrow night from the convention floor and back to Judy or Bernie or Jeff.
We have more people, too.
And all of us. Thanks very much, guys. Speaking of the speech, Mike McCurry is still with us. At one point in his speech tonight, President Clinton said of the American military, the American military is the best trained, best equipped, most effective fighting force in the world. Any adversary who believes those who say otherwise is making a grave mistake. What was his point?
That was a serious piece of business from a commander-in-chief. He was both making a political point, I think, about what was said in Philadelphia. Recall the very next day after that case was laid out at the Republican convention, in a pretty extraordinary moment, the Defense Department came out and challenged that description of the readiness of America's fighting force. They took great umbrage of that, and I think that anger about that description of our fighting men and women has stuck in the president's craw, very clearly.
George W. Bush came back in response and said that he had read this report at the end of last year, and why hadn't they clarified it in the interim?
Well, and I think that they had clarified. There's been a great debate about the force posture of the United States readiness, and it continues, and you'll hear more about this in the debate about missile defenses. I mean, it's interesting. We may actually see some national security elements enter into this fall debate.
Mike, very quickly, one of the things the presidential speech does when it's this powerful politically is it overshadows everyone. I would suggest tonight, perhaps including Mrs. Clinton.
I think that's probably true. I think President Clinton gave a better campaign speech for her Senate race than she did. But, she had a lot to do. She had to say thank you as First Lady. She had to do some serious business for herself as a candidate for office. She clearly had to credential Al Gore from her own personal point of view. That's a tough speech to give, and particularly after a long litany, very impressive litany of women in the Democratic Party who have risen to the rank United States Senator.
One-word answer. Were you surprised the president didn't say more about his own personal situation?
No, but there was one interesting grace note in this speech that looked ad lib when he, as he credited Tipper Gore's work in mental health, referenced his own gratitude for that. I thought that was a very revealing and appropriate comment.
And at the very end, when he said, "Whatever you think about me, remember, keep putting people first."
Yes, that was his 1992 campaign slogan, 1996 campaign slogan.
Well, tomorrow is a big day. Session 2. Here's a look ahead. Here's a look ahead to the second day of the Democratic National Convention, Tuesday, August 15th. One of the first famous faces for the primetime television audience outside the West Coast will be the Reverend Jesse Jackson. The nightly segment of American Dialogues follows in their 9 o'clock hour, Eastern, 6 local. It will again feature everyday folks with stories embodying convention themes. Then the final hour of the evening, 10 Eastern, 7 Pacific. Caroline Kennedy Schlossberg will deliver remarks to the convention, as will her uncle, Senator Ted Kennedy. Bill Bradley, who had challenged Gore for the Democrats' nomination, will then speak. He'll be followed by a relative unknown on the national stage.
Good luck. You'll be great. Okay.
A congressman from Tennessee, Harold Ford Jr., the first African-American to succeed his father in Congress. Ford will deliver the keynote address of this night, Tuesday, August 15th. But this night, President Clinton rocked the House and teed up the Democratic Party for Al Gore and Joe Lieberman.
And this convention is off and running. One night behind us, 3 to go.
And I think we ought to hear the campaign battle. The Republicans say honor and decency. The Democrats say it's the economy, stupid. Mike, you'll be here tomorrow.
And it's good, just a good night to be a Democrat where you can be a little more partisan.
Harold Ford Jr.?
Harold Ford Jr., former intern of mine at the Democratic National Committee. I'll be a very proud former employer tomorrow.
And tomorrow night we'll have an interview with Caroline Kennedy and Senator Ted Kennedy right here.
Larry King Live is next with a very special guest among other special guests. Until tomorrow, for Jeff Greenfield, Judy Woodruff, I'm Bernard Shaw. Stay tuned. More coming up from Los Angeles.
For the most extensive coverage of the Democratic National Convention, on television, on radio, and online, stay with CNN.
Live on the edge with Discovery Channel's Extreme Shark Safari Sweepstakes. Grand prize is a trip or two to South Africa and a chance to swim with sharks courtesy of Discovery Travel. Local first prize winners will capture their own extreme adventures with Shark Week digital cameras. Look for this display at participating sponsors to enter the Extreme Shark Safari Sweepstakes. And don't miss Shark Week Uncaged, beginning Sunday, August 13th at 9 Eastern and Pacific on the Discovery Channel.
I believe in Two Rivers. I believe in American pride.
Hello, I'm Bobby McKee. And at Two Rivers Ford, we can put you in a new 2000 Ford Focus for as low as $12,988. This world-class Ford Focus is the hottest new product on the road today. Come see us at Two Rivers Ford, 2730 Lebanon Road in Nashville. We've got the best price and the best service in town. Just let us prove it.
Welcome to the Face Snodgrass Gallery, located on the corner of Main Street and the Square in historic downtown Franklin. We'd like to introduce you to a sampling of some of the wonderful items we carry. A beautiful collection of home and office accessories are complemented by our fine original art and frames and year-round displays of Christmas items. We offer a bridal and baby registry, corporate gifts, and a collection of unique children's items. Come spend the day in historic downtown Franklin and be sure to start at the Face Snodgrass Gallery.
Hi, I'm Gary Chapman, and these are my office assistants. This is Peaches, and this is Stuart. They came from Happy Tales Humane, Middle Tennessee's only no-kill animal shelter, dedicated to finding a home for every dog, cat, and guinea pig it takes in. You can show your support by donating your time, your money, your services, and maybe even a little love to Happy Tales. Your financial contributions are tax-deductible, and the rewards of taking care of God's little creatures are even better than that. Take it from me, Peaches, Stuart, and lots of other pets. Happy endings begin with Happy Tales.
CNN, America's campaign headquarters.
Tonight, Bill Clinton takes center stage for his last big convention speech as a sitting president. Joining us at the Staples Center in Los Angeles, the 39th President of the United States, Jimmy Carter, then others, all next on another special edition of Larry King Live at the 43rd Democratic National Convention. Good evening and welcome to part 2 of Larry King Live. As you know, as we did in Philadelphia with the Republicans, we'll do 2 editions of this program every night at 9 and midnight Eastern Time. And later to come, we'll meet Senator George Mitchell. We'll also meet Captain Igor Kolosov. He is aboard the Scorpion in Long Beach, California, a former electronic weapons officer on a Russian sub. As you know, we still have that tragedy occurring. And then later, our dynamic duo of Jack Kemp and the Honorable Ann Richards. But we start with the former President of the United States, Jimmy Carter. Before we talk a little later about the submarine incident, what did you think of the President?